With the announcement and release of the Atari 7800 Plus at the tail end of 2024, I think a lot of people were looking to the 7800 games being released alongside that console for some high quality and fun to play titles. And why wouldn't they? The 2600 Plus came out in November of the previous year, so that was old news. 7800 is the wave of the future. The future! Seriously though, it feels like the 2600 stuff got lost in the shuffle. At least for myself, and that's a shame, because one of the games released was a conversion of Champ Games' Conquest of Mars, now under its proper title of Caverns of Mars. And I don't have to tell anybody who is familiar with Champ Games how great their titles usually are. So let's see if Caverns of Mars lives up to the quality that we've come to expect from Champ Games and Atari, or if it's a rare miss for both. Sit back, relax, and let's explore the Caverns of Mars, a 2024 2600 and 7800 Plus release for all of you. But real quick, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon to be notified whenever we upload. All we do is cover Atari, things both old and new for the company and their consoles. So if that sounds interesting to you, then again, please subscribe. And check out our social media and Discord server, links in the description. Okay, on to the review. Caverns of Mars was originally released in 1981 by Greg Christensen for the Atari Program Exchange on the 8-bit line of computers. It was the most successful title to ever come out of that program, and it soon received a cartridge release and found its way into Atari's proper catalog. The game is a vertically scrolling shooter, where you must explore several caverns, all the while avoiding traps, enemies, and the terrain itself, while trying to reach the bottom to set a bomb. You then finish each cavern with an escape. And then, with each successful escape and cavern destroyed, you're rewarded with another, more difficult one to traverse. Like many early Atari games, the premise is simple, but man, can it ever be addictive, if not a bit difficult. Easy to learn, difficult to master was Atari's mantra, and this game embodies that to a T. The new 2600 conversion stays very true to the original, and looks impressive for the video computer system. While there isn't a huge color variety in the game, it somehow manages to look fairly detailed and crisp, especially in HD on the Plus line of consoles. The destroyable enemies, fuel tanks, and obstacles flash at you, and you'll encounter a fair bit of traps and enemies on your way through each cavern. Maybe I'm easily impressed, but the F on the fuel tanks looks so clear, and it's just easy to read. Something that you don't often see on the 2600. And the title screen is awesome too, featuring the title of the game, along with your craft hovering just above your first cavern. The only real thing to do on the title screen is to select your difficulty, and there is a fair bit here for you to choose from. I appreciate having so many difficulty levels, as most players will want to increase the challenge once they get the hang of things. But this game won't be a pushover, that's for sure. So it might be a long while before you're brave enough to attempt anything other than Pilot or Novice. Hey, I'm not judging. As I said before, graphically this game is a treat for the console it's on. Not the most impressive thing I've ever seen running on the 2600, but excellent in its own right. I really like the design of the ship, but you'll be cursing how large it is at times when you blow up on the same obstacle over and over again. But this is all by design, and the developer has given you just enough room to maneuver in areas, leaving whether you make it or not all up to your ability to squeeze the craft into those corridors and crevices. The laser gates and shifting diamonds really gave me issues, as the timing on some of them is hard to get down. But it always felt rewarding to get past a difficult portion and see what challenges are lying in wait for us. I never felt so frustrated that I wasn't having fun or wanted to quit the game. Caverns of Mars really straddles that line of too difficult and a proper challenge, and it does it really well. Your bullets come out of the wingtips of your spacecraft, so it'll also take a little time to learn how to line up your shots. This will be key if you want to see past the third or fourth cavern. There are portions where you're free-falling in open space within the caverns. During these sections, you're not safe though, as a barrage of missiles and fuel tanks are flying at you quickly. And you're going to miss a lot of these shots in these moments, and fail to maneuver out of the way of the quickly approaching obstacles. You'll wind up having to use a continue or two the first time you come across these sections. Once you learn the quirks of controlling the ship, lining up your shots, and when and where to go lower on the screen, you'll be completing this section and all the others with expert precision. The game does a really great job at making you feel like an ace pilot when you're doing well, especially when you're escaping the cavern as your bomb ticks down. And it's really cool every time you have to do this. And the game forces you to memorize things as you traverse it in reverse on your way out. You're not given a lot of time, and you no longer have to worry about shooting. The button accelerates you to breakneck speeds, and you'll have to be quick all the while escaping the tight corridors. This game just is full of incredible moments and incredible stuff, and it all plays extremely well. Caverns of Mars is also generous with lives and continues, so you'll have plenty of opportunities to correct your mistakes and learn the areas of each level that are giving you trouble. Heck, the game is very generous with checkpoints too, and even when using a continue, Caverns of Mars will not make you start a level over until you've used all of your stock and continues. Despite its difficulty, Caverns of Mars is very fair, and I never felt like a death wasn't my own fault. I have to say, this game really impressed me, and it's a shame that I honestly almost ignored it. I was so focused on the 7800 stuff that this gem almost passed me by completely. But Caverns of Mars isn't perfect, and there is one area that really truly disappointed me, and that is the audio. From the title screen, all the way through certain sections of the game, I couldn't help but find the audio, well, really grating on my ears. The sound of the ship hovering near the top of the screen instantly got on my nerves. While it's more bearable when the ship is hovering low on the screen, it's still pretty bad. All this is a shame, because everything else is so excellent in Caverns of Mars. But I just couldn't get over the harsh sound. Still, even with this mark against the game, Caverns of Mars captivated me. But hey, it's time to fly into the tunnel known as the pros and cons section to see just how well Caverns of Mars is going to score. And as always, we start with the pros. Caverns of Mars looks brilliant. I really think the developer did so much with so little here graphically. The challenge, while difficult, is fair, and you start with plenty of lives and continues to keep things going for long play sessions. And if you find that things are getting a little too easy, all you need to do is up the difficulty level, and you should be able to get a challenge once again. I love the variety of gameplay and sections in each tunnel as well, with the escape portions being a real highlight for myself. Caverns of Mars is a gem on the 2600, and it shows why Champ Games has been so beloved for so long in the Atari community. But I do have a con, and again, that's the sound. I really couldn't come to terms with the audio, and I had to mute it after a little while. It's just harsh and abrasive to the ears. Some people might not be able to come to terms with the difficulty either, but I feel that this game is more than fair. And, well, that's it for the cons. Caverns of Mars for the 2600 and plus line of consoles is just fantastic, and that's why I'm going to give it 4 one-button joysticks out of 5. If the sound just wasn't so bad, it would have been a definite 5 out of 5 for me. But I couldn't score it perfect knowing that the audio, well, was just so harsh and abrasive. The rest of the game is excellent though, and everybody should pick this one up and give it a try. Heck, at $29.99, this game is a must-own for all 2600 and plus line console owners, in my opinion. If you love Atari games and Caverns of Mars, then you won't be disappointed. But that's my opinion, and now I want to hear from all of you. Do you agree with my assessment and score for Caverns of Mars? Or was I way off somewhere? Did you pick this game up, or did you skip it over? And if so, why? And have you played any other version of Caverns of Mars? How does this one compare to those? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please, hit the like button if you enjoyed the review, or leave a dislike if you didn't. Hey, it's only fair, right? I'd also like to take a minute to thank these classy Atarians for supporting the channel. They have all either picked up a YouTube membership or they support me on Patreon. Either way, I couldn't do this without all their help. And if you want to support the channel, grab a membership or check out our Patreon. Link in the description. But with all that, it's time to wrap up yet another review here on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who barely made it out of a tunnel on time before the bomb I set blew it all up, on a planet known as the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for watching. And as always, remember to stay classy, Atarians. When the 2600 Junior was released around 1985, it brought with it a bunch of new re-release software as well. Many of these games came in red boxes with red labels, and many represented classic 2600 titles such as Space Invaders, 2600 compatible versions of 7800 games like Xenophobe and Desert Falcon, and exciting new games that we hadn't received before like Radar Lock and Roadrunner. Secret Quest falls into the last category, and just like the other games in that category, it was an exciting new title for owners of the Atari 2600. And even for people that owned the 7800, as that console was backwards compatible with 2600 software. But Secret Quest also promoted the fact that it was created by Atari founder Nolan Bushnell, and represented his return to the 2600 for the first time in many years. So is this game worthy of all the hype it attempted to generate, or is it a game best forgotten to time? Let's find out. Upon powering the game on, you're greeted with a title screen, something that more and more later 2600 games had. But interestingly, you can also enter 2 letters to represent your initials. And not only did this provide some customization to the adventure, in an admittedly small way, but it also kept people from sharing passwords with one another to quickly complete the game. That's right, this 2600 game uses a password system, as the adventure is quite large and difficult. After you're entering your initials, you're spawned into an empty room and move forward a screen to acquire your sword. I have to admit, this screams Zelda, and I have a feeling that this is 2600's attempt at a Zelda-style game. You use your sword and a few other weapons to clear rooms and acquire energy and oxygen to refill your 2 bars. Energy is used as a sort of weapon power, and if the bar completely depletes, then you no longer have the ability to use your weapons. The oxygen bar is your life, and if it depletes, then your next hit will result in death. The first 2 space stations you traverse are small, and are easy enough to get through. In Secret Quest, you must enter and find the self-destruct code for 8 space stations that have been overran by a nice variety of enemy aliens and monsters. Once you find each symbol of the self-destruct code, you must enter them and escape within a short time frame in order to travel to the next space station and do it all over again. Once you reach about the 4th level, things get really tough, as these places are large mazes, especially for the 2600. If you don't like making maps of each level, then you're not likely to make it too far in this game. But the game does provide a lot of challenge and gameplay, as not only are the space stations large, but they can actually contain challenging enemies for you to deal with. Their patterns are difficult to get the hang of, and make it for a great risk versus reward in battling them. Do you need oxygen or energy? Then you'll have to fight monsters. But will you lose more of each than you gain in the battle? If so, it might be best to avoid them, and find easier enemies such as bear traps and potato men, rather than trying to fight the difficult Medusas and Stompers. You also acquire 2 more weapons in your adventure, and you'll need them both if you want to have any hope of clearing all 8 space stations. As I said before, your sword is picked up right from the start, but you'll also eventually track down a sonic blaster and a particle beam. Each one is stronger than the last, but they also use way more energy to use, so your old weapons do not become completely useless. Which is something I like. Again, for a 2600 game, the combat is done quite well, and requires some thought before blindly entering into a battle. You'll also come across sonic keys which open yellow locked transporters, but I see little value in this. You get something that seems to read extra, but as far as I can tell it's just extra points. Hardly worth the effort. Still, this seems to be Atari's shot at making a Zelda-style adventure for the 2600, and I think given the console's limitations and age, they did a fantastic job. Can it hold a candle to that game? Well, no, obviously not. but the fact that they were able to pull off an intricate password system, giving you a large variety of levels complete with multiple floors each, and a large variety of enemies with different behaviors is extremely impressive. And it's so fitting that it's a space adventure, as the 2600 was the king of space games. Graphically, Secret Quest looks pretty good for a 2600 game. I like your little spaceman, it kinda reminds me just a little bit of Samus Aran. But each of the enemies are nicely detailed and are very distinct from one another. There are also booby traps around each level that drain you of your resources. And eventually you'll come across dragons that protect new rooms, and fire on you unless you know how to deal with them. The sound effects are minimal, and pretty much give you what you would expect from the console. Nothing special from the audio department, but nothing bad either. It works for what it is, but given how excellent the gameplay is, and how good the graphics are, it would have been nice to get something a little different, and a little more special from the audio as well. I think if you enjoyed previous adventure games on the 2600, you'll definitely like this one. But the good news is, if you found Adventure, Sword Quest, E.T., and Indiana Jones too archaic to play and enjoy, then I think Secret Quest will be modern enough and straightforward enough that you'll have a good time. There is a nice variety of items, enemies, and weapons, but they're also self-explanatory enough that you won't be scratching your head, wondering what the heck they are, or what they're supposed to do. Unfortunately, you're going to have to sit pretty close to the console, as they had to use some of the buttons on the thing to make it work properly. The 2600 uses a one-button joystick, and they needed to give you a way to access menus and change items, etc. But luckily, using the console's buttons doesn't take too long to learn, and it doesn't really feel too inconvenient either. I mean, it's a workaround, nothing more, nothing less. Secret Quest is probably one of the best adventures I played on the 2600 up to this point. That's why I'm going to give Secret Quest on the Atari 2600 4 Pro-Line controllers out of 5. It comes recommended as a large Zelda-style adventure for the 2600, with good-looking enemies and player sprites. A variety of weapons and items that are easily identifiable are also available to you. There are numerous enemies with their own attack patterns, and even some traps to avoid. Finding and entering self-destruct codes is better done than you may initially think, and adds some variety and intensity to the gameplay. For cons, this game does use buttons on the console, which I don't think many people are a fan of. The sound can be somewhat basic, and the password system, even though innovative for the console it's on, can be difficult to write down and enter. But I recommend taking a picture of your password with your cell phone. You'll also have to make your own maps, or at the very least maybe grab one from a FAQ. That is, if you want to have any hope in defeating later space stations. But overall, this is an epic-feeling game on the 2600, and even for the 7800. It's flawed, but a lot of the flaws are just limitations of the console, and I think it works more than it doesn't. But most of all, when compared to adventure games that came before it, it's a massive step up into the modern generation of video games. I honestly wish a 7800 version would have came out that used the second button on the Pro line, beefed up the graphics a bit, and added some more content. But regardless, I'm glad we're able to experience it as it is. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my assessment and score of the game? Or is it much worse than I say it is? Let me know down in the comments below. This has been the 7800 Pro Gamer on behalf of the Atari Network, and remember to stay classy, Atarians. The single biggest complaint I hear about Atari Age, and this whole purchasing stuff for the retro consoles thing, is that the new games simply take too long to ship and arrive. Some people have been waiting years, over a year and a half for some items, and I myself have been waiting, well, quite a while for a certain thing to come from Atari.com. I ordered it from them, I believe in September of last year, and to my surprise, it was delivered today, in mid-December of 2024. These wait periods are ridiculous for anything, and people don't want to tie up their money for months and months at a time without any product to speak of. But regardless, let's grab Save Mary, rip this baby open, plug it into my brand new spanking Atari 7800 Plus, along with my 7800 proper and 2600 Junior, and see if this game was worth the wait or just an all-around disappointment from start to finish. But first, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy Atari and retro gaming content, and leave a like after the video. It helps the channel a ton. And head over to the Atari Network Discord, where we will have our final high score challenge for the year very soon. I have one trophy cart left, so try to get your hands on it if you so desire. Okay guys, on to the review. Save Mary is a game with a rich and deep history, but the version I hold in my hands was produced and released by Atari for their XP line of limited edition cartridges. The game has been released with all kinds of cover arts over the years, and there have been versions that are, well, okay looking, and some that are just awful looking, and even a few that are just plain scary. Yikes. You can see the detailed history over at Atari7800forever.com. But you might be thinking, 7800 Forever, isn't this a 2600 cartridge? And it is. Well, now it is. But for a long time, the only way to get Save Mary to work was on a 7800 console. So many people considered it to be a 7800 game, even if it was originally intended for the 2600 VCS back in the 1980s. Okay, so the history is that Save Mary was a prototype originally developed by Todd Fry back in 1989. But it was never finished and never optimized to run within the hardware restrictions of a true 2600. But the ROM could be ran on a 7800. It appears Atari has fixed this, as it does seem to run on 2600 consoles now, which is great. It was made available on several flashback consoles and in Atari collections over the years, but now it's finally available on cartridge, and officially from Atari no less. So with all the history out of the way, let's dig into the game. And it's actually pretty good in my opinion. And I think it would have been appreciated more so in 1989. You play as a crane that is attempting to build a tower to save the titular Mary, who is quickly being covered by water in the center of the screen. Pieces to the tower that you can build will roll towards the center from the right and left sides of the screen. And you will want to grab them by moving the crane over them and holding the button before they tumble off the cliff and become rubble. You'll want to then take these pieces and try to place them on solid ground, so that the tower continues to be built upward, until such a time that you can grab Mary and save her life. And then she immediately falls back into the canyon, and you have to do it all over again with smaller and more difficult pieces that join together in more intricate ways. The gameplay is solid, and the 3 included difficulty settings really add to the challenge. I find Novice to be simply too easy, but it's perfect when you're trying to get the hang of maneuvering the crane and seeing how the pieces snap into place. But most people will want to play on Standard and eventually Advanced for a true challenge. And in Advanced, you get a sense of urgency that the developer probably intended for. Graphically, the game doesn't look bad for a late 2600 release. Mary is detailed enough and looks like an actual person. Well, mostly. She doesn't look like the beautiful babe that's shown on the cover art, but she'll do just fine, with the help of your imagination taking care of the rest. The crane above the canyon looks really good, and the blocks on the sides of the canyon looks good too. The water filling in and covering the tower you're building is a nice effect too. Everything is really good looking for the 2600, and I find it all pleasant. But the sound, on the other hand, well, it isn't my favorite sounding game. Mind you, it's nothing we haven't heard from the 2600 before, but I ended up muting the TV after a while and just rocking out to my favorite music. The intro and outro ditty sounds perfectly fine, but I don't like the sound effects of the crane moving and the tower pieces being destroyed. They didn't bug me initially, but with those being the only 2 sounds to mostly speak of, well, I got tired of them fast. The power-ups, or items that appear just below the tower pieces, are also a little bit of a head-scratcher for me. I would pick them up and drop them into the center, as it appears that's all you can do with them, but they didn't seem to have much of an effect, if any, on what I was doing. After reading the manual, they made a little more sense, but honestly, you get the plug and the numbers way too often, and those seem to have the least of an effect on the gameplay. The plug is supposed to stop the water a bit, but it's hardly noticeable. Then there's a stop sign, and I initially thought it was a boulder, if I'm honest, but the stop sign stops Mary from running around, so it makes it easier not to hit her while building the tower. The oil can make your crane move faster, but I never noticed this at all. The gold blocks make Mary invulnerable, and this item would be awesome, but I never found it or used it that I can recall. And finally, if you see a Mary figure, then you get an extra life. These power-ups are duds in my opinion, but they sound good on paper. They just don't seem to have a noticeable enough of an effect, if I'm honest. But the rest of the gameplay is fine, and I really did enjoy it. It's a game that I see myself going back to, especially when I want something to focus on, but not really think about, if that makes sense. The way the crane snaps the pieces into place might take a little getting used to, but it works fine and I actually like it. Save Mary does more right than wrong, and it's a game I think Atari should offer indefinitely on their website. Right now it says sold out, and that's a shame, because it's a real gem. Hopefully they make it available routinely for fans of the 2600 and their Plus line of consoles, because it's a good, solid puzzle game. But let's head on to the Atari Network pros and cons section and see just how solid it really is. And as usual, we start with the pros. Save Mary actually looks really good, especially for an Atari 2600 game. The items are easy to decipher and the game is fun. Really fun, actually. More fun than I thought it would be. The gameplay is solid, and the fact that the blocks will snap into place using invisible lines works just fine to me. There's a ton of replayability here and some really nice graphical effects. Plus 3 difficulty settings to keep the challenge high. But we're on to the cons, and I really only have 3. First, the audio just isn't good. It's nothing we haven't heard before, and to me, it's the worst the 2600 can produce. The power-ups are lackluster and don't have enough of an effect, in my opinion. It's a real lost opportunity. And finally, the game is sold out over at Atari.com. And there's no indication that it'll be back for sale soon. Atari, listen to me. This game is a gem. Get it back into the hands of Atari 2600 and 7800 Plus owners ASAP. But with all that said, I'm going to give Save Mary for the Atari 2600 3 one-button joysticks out of 5. It's a solid puzzle game with a few quirks that are forgivable. I don't think it'll be everybody's cup of tea, but if you want a solid Atari puzzle game that's in a similar vein as Tetris, well, then this is it. I really do hope that Atari will release it again and permanently this time, as it's a good one to have in their lineup for the Plus series of consoles. But with all that said, well, now I want to hear from all of you. Do you agree with my score, or do you think it's better or worse than what I say? Did you pick this one up, and if so, did you receive your cartridge yet? Do you have a different version of Save Mary, and if so, does it play and look the same as this one? Let me know about all this and more down in the comments below. And I'd like to take this second to thank all these classy Atarians for their support via YouTube memberships and Patreon. Thanks to their help, I'm able to cover games just like this one, and do high score challenges like I am over on the Atari Network Discord server right now. I couldn't do this without all of your help, so thank you. You guys rock. And with that, it's time to wrap up another review here on the channel. I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a crane operator who's off with pay after crushing a trapped woman under some rubble in the canyon known as the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for watching. And please remember to stay classy, Atarians. Phoenix was one of those hand-me-down games I had as a kid, and I always wanted to be good at it. There was something about it that just made it cooler to me than most of the other games we had for the 2600, and I think it was probably something to do with the enemy design. I was a strange kid, and I enjoyed games like Pole Position 2 for its ability to scroll the background in and out of sight. Something about seeing that made the game feel special to me. Like somehow the console was doing something that I didn't think the Atari should be able to do. And I think I got a similar feeling, although to a lesser extent, when I encountered the mid-level enemies and bosses of Phoenix. And it was a game I always desired to be good at, but I never honestly was. I'm a big middle-aged boy now, and I'm sure I can conquer the Phoenix and destroy the massive spaceship afterwards. Right? Phoenix was originally developed for the Japanese arcades back in 1980 by Taito. The American arcade rights was purchased by Century, and the home rights were picked up by Atari for a 1983 release on the 2600. Just a side note, but Atari sued Magic over Demon Attack, because they felt it was too similar to this game. The two companies settled out of court with the Magic still being allowed to distribute their game. The more you know. But anyway, back to reviewing Phoenix.
I was never familiar with the arcade game, and I want to look at this one on its own merit anyway. And before I forget, this game is compatible with the Atari 2600 Plus, and looks pretty darn good on an HD television. At least in my opinion. When you first boot up the game, you start by controlling what looks like a spider, or maybe a guy running side to side with his arms and legs sort of pulled out and held away from his body. I don't know, it looks weird. In the arcades, you can better tell it's a spaceship. But whatever, I said I wasn't going to bring up the arcade. Focus, pro gamer, focus. So you start out against a small fleet of 8 vaguely bird-shaped enemies, and they flap their wings convincingly. Most of the 8 stay in formation, but 2 will start to drop down and kind of pursue you, making them a priority, and a more lethal enemy overall. If you manage to shoot the 2 that are moving sporadically before the rest, then 2 more will take their place. Next, you fight a wave in a V pattern of 8 more, slightly different in color, birds, and they behave essentially in the same manner. But to me, things get really cool starting with the next wave of large blue birds. They fly back and forth, left and right, and swoop down and back, all while shooting at you. You can shoot their wings off if you have poor aim, but it doesn't seem to hinder them at all. You have to instead try to shoot their center. When you get down to just a few birds left, they begin to dive bomb you, kamikaze style. Their shots also become numerous and hard to avoid when they're in this state as well. Then you fight a similar wave of cooler looking red birds before moving on to the final screen. And this final screen is an alien and a UFO, slowly dropping down towards your ship in an effort to either shoot you down or crush you. The bottom of the UFO ship, or the red part, can be shot away, but beware as he shoots you from anywhere below the ship to try and stop you. Once you get enough of the red section blown away, you start shooting against the blue portion, and while smaller, this force field sort of rotates left and right, meaning that whatever you shoot just shifts away from you. If you can clear this, you can get a clean shot on the alien by shooting where he is. And if you connect, then you start all over with slightly faster and more aggressive birds. The gameplay is fun and has good variety for a 2600 game, but boy is this game hard. These birds move towards and away from you in an almost smart manner, but it's really just clever programming. And trying to hit the center of the third and fourth wave of large birds can be more difficult than you think. Luckily, you have a force field you can activate by pressing down on the joystick, but you lose your ability to move when it's active and could end up a sitting duck when it goes away. Still, the gameplay's fantastic, and even with its high difficulty level, I find it to be an enjoyable experience on the console. Graphically, the game can be somewhat impressive in some areas, mainly the enemy designs, but boy do I find the main player sprite to be disappointing. I can't help but to think it looks like a dude spreading his limbs out, like a cowboy kind of marching out of a saloon for a shootout or something. As a kid, I thought it was a guy doing a handstand, but if that's the case, then what is he shooting from his midsection? You know what? Never mind. The audio is a bit repetitive with this sort of whirring sound effect playing while you battle the small birds. It's then replaced by a sort of melodic tone when the big birds come, and that sound can be quite entrancing. But I feel the most annoying is the sound of the beep beep that plays for the UFO alien boss thing. Still, even with that one complaint, I like all the other different sounds and the sounds of your fire and enemies blowing up. Overall, the game has some unique audio, and I mostly like it. And, as far as Phoenix goes, that's sort of it. You start with 4 lives and can earn another after you score 5,000 points. Once your lives are gone, you either have to start all over or just give up. It's a simple, addictive challenge with some unique ideas and execution, especially for the console. But I think we need to break it down in the really cool Atari Network pros and cons section to decide if the game should be recommended or not. For the pros, I really like the enemy sprites in this game. They're pretty unique and animate well. I also like the variety in enemies, with 5 different screens and 3 that change things up quite a bit. The game also follows the old easy to learn, difficult to master mantra. The sound effects seem like they should get annoying, but I enjoyed most of them. And even the worst sound that this game has is pretty bearable. The enemies also behave and act differently, even seeming to act intelligently from time to time. But there are some cons we need to go over, like the fact that the game can be really hard. You need to be up for the challenge. The final boss sound effects are by far the most annoying. I do like the shield, but it's too difficult to be blown up when it disengages, making its usefulness limited. Also, what's up with the player sprite? Seriously. But with all that said, I think it's fair to give the port of Phoenix for the Atari 2600 4 original 1-button joysticks out of 5. The game is fun despite its difficulty, and it does so much right. The enemies are cool, and the sounds that represent them are pretty unique, and it plays great in my opinion. So if you never checked out Phoenix before, you might just want to give it a look. It can be fairly affordable and is well worth looking into. But now I want to hear from you guys. Have you played the original arcade version? Does it compare well to this one? Or have you played the 2600 version of Phoenix? If so, do you think I was fair to it? Or should I have scored it differently? And did I leave anything out of this video? Please leave the answers to all these and more in the comments down below. And be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't. I do reviews like this one every Sunday and put out a weekly featured video every Thursday. We also do the Atari Network podcast every other Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 Pacific. We discuss everything Atari with myself and co-host Vinny Vineyard of Big and Funky Productions YouTube channel. So come and join us for the next episode. I'd also like to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting me on Patreon. You can too by clicking the link in the description. It's $5 a month and helps the Atari Network to grow. You also get exclusive behind-the-scenes videos, different audio files, early access to some videos, and of course, your name mentioned at the end of every video. Also, please join the Atari Network Discord server if you're into that sort of thing. The link will also be in the description. And we have merch available if you're interested, and you guessed it, the link is in the description. Okay guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who burned to ashes, only to arise like a mighty phoenix here at the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for watching my review of Phoenix for the 2600. And remember, stay classy, Atarians.
Audacity Games is a company that very much is trying to keep the origins of Activision alive. Forget that the company has now become an evil conglomerate that is going to eventually take over the world, and try to remember a time where Activision represented everything right with the video game world. They gave their developers credit front and center on the cartridges and in advertisements, and they released quality games that would go on to be some of the most fondly remembered on the 2600. It makes sense that Audacity would want to continue that tradition, because it features the all-star developers from those games. The Kitchen Brothers, David Crane, and the developer of today's game, John Van Ryzen. And if that name sounds familiar, well it should. He created the fantastic Hero for the 2600, 5200, and just about every other console of the time. And that game is often considered one of the best of its time. So the question is, did Audacity and Mr. Van Ryzen simply make Hero in space? Or did they make something totally unique and worth owning for the 2600? Let's find out. Alien Abduction was released on cartridge from Audacity's website on June 15th, but the game was already available for the Atari VCS as of May of 2023. I personally waited for the cartridge, and I'm glad I did. This cart is clearly modeled after an Activision cartridge, and that's a really nice touch. The box and manual both feel and look high quality as well. But enough of that stuff. Let's talk about the game itself. You take control of a hero who is trying to rescue a princess that has been abducted by aliens. And they have laid traps for you all over their caverns. Luckily, you're equipped with jet-powered boots, an energy defense system, and of course, your trusty plasma gun. And that's all you'll really need to complete your objective. You will have to acquire more energy and health, as enemies will constantly be draining the latter, and you constantly lose the former as you play. The levels start out pretty short with some simple enemies and very few floors, but things ramp up gradually. When I first turned the game on, I wasn't sure what to do, if I'm being 100% honest. I fell through the floor a few times and died, but it won't take long to learn that you need to hover and try to land on solid floors, or try to time a crouch right as you hit the hollow floors. You'll face enemies, some of which can be destroyed with a few shots, and some who seem to be invincible. It takes trial and error to figure out which is which, but it doesn't take long to get pretty much everything figured out. The tall robots can't be killed with your plasma gun, but most green creatures can. The stationary guns can also be killed, usually with a single shot. You start by working your way down to the princess, but other levels will have you traveling left and right, and eventually, upwards. Believe it or not, this is a nice variety, and each direction has its own dangers and challenges. And this game feels like an Atari game we might have purchased during the 2600's life. It has elements of Hero, but it mostly feels like its own thing, in my opinion.
The floors are more narrow, and you have different rules for traveling about the level, along with more enemies. Some are lifted direct from Hero, however, like the snake that pops out of the walls, or the flashing red walls that you absolutely cannot touch. You collect hearts that act as lives, and you'll want to go out of your way to grab those. There are also traps that will be sprung in some scenarios, like a drill that will block your path or enemies that will fly out of the walls, so you need to always be on your toes. You'll also want to grab all the energy you can, because as I stated before, you're always burning through it. The gameplay feels solid and fun. I sat down to record my first experience with the game and just write down some initial reactions, and before I knew it, over an hour had flown by. I made it all the way to level 20 in that time, and I knew I was instantly hooked. The levels do repeat a bit, but they also get harder each time you play through them. And there are new ones being thrown in constantly, so even when you think you've seen it all, there will be new layouts and challenges awaiting you. The only frustration I experienced was occasionally getting stuck on walls, and having to wiggle around a bit to get through. This seems to be a symptom of the tight spaces, but was nothing more than a minor annoyance. The sound is pretty sparse, but it ultimately works. There was nothing that was offensive to my ears or any of my senses. And the graphics, well, they aren't the best on the console, not even close. But once again, they work, and you can tell what everything is supposed to be, and what you can touch and shouldn't touch. Even with its basic sound and minimalistic graphics, the game communicates everything that it needs to. It really feels like a classic Atari game, but one that has been informed by everything learned in the years since. It's clean, it's fun, and it's addictive. And I think that's everything I wanted to say about Alien Abduction. It's nothing fancy, and there isn't a lot to describe or talk about. It's a game that just works for what it is, and should take most Atari fans back to their childhood. But now we have to give it a score, and the best way to do that is to abduct the game into the pros and cons system, and give it a deep probe for information. And as always, we start with the the pros. Sorry about that. For the pros, I have to say that despite falling to my death the first 3 times or so, well, it was easy to learn the game and grasp what you're supposed to do. It has that familiar feel, and Alien Abduction does a great job of informing the player on what they should know. The levels can move in any of the 4 directions, and they each have their own challenges and feel, which is nice. The game plays fair, and any time I died, well, I felt like it was my fault, and it also controls great. You can tell that this John Van Ryzen guy knows his stuff. And it also managed to invoke nostalgia of Hero without feeling like a copy. It combined just enough of the old with just enough of the new. And despite the audio and graphics being a little basic, well, they all work. But now we have to get on with the cons. And first, I have to say that getting stuck on the walls can be a little, well, annoying. This seems to be a symptom of the narrow corridors. And, well, I guess that's it. I really enjoyed Alien Abduction a lot more than I anticipated, and I have a feeling I'll be playing it a long time after this review is done and posted. Because of that, I'm going to give Alien Abduction for the Atari 2600 5 CX40 joysticks out of 5. That's right, Alien Abduction gets the Atari Network seal of excellence. I recommend you grab a cart from Audacity Games whenever you have the chance. Or pick it up from the Atari VCS store if you own that. It was a lot of fun and a game that I continue to play again and again, even after grabbing the video I needed. If you didn't like the original Hero, well then you might not enjoy it as much as I did. But I think that it's different enough from that game that you might enjoy it anyway. Alien Abduction brought me back to a simpler time, when Atari was fun, video games were cool, and things were simple. And I hope it can do the same for you. But now that I've given you my take, I want to hear what you all think. Do you agree with my score, or am I drunk on that Audacity Kool-Aid? What score would you have given the game? And do you prefer this, or Circus Convoy, the other Audacity release? Let me know the answers to all this, and more down in the comments below. And please, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you haven't already. We put out 2 videos a week, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload. And thank you to the following classy Atarians who support me on Patreon. Without their help, the Atari Network wouldn't be able to review the games we do, or replace and upgrade equipment when the need arises. You can support the Atari Network too over at patreon.com/7800ProGamer. In exchange, you get exclusive audios and videos a few times a month. So thank you, to My Own Celestial, Head Trauma Bob, OG Hugo, Jolt 7800, Ball Gobbler, Socrates 63, Vince the Spook, Mr. Shua TV, Jeremiah Thomas, and Huge Ass 79. I couldn't do this without all of your support. And with that, it's time to wrap up yet another review here on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a princess abducted by aliens for the 20th time, from a kingdom called the Atari Network, and I want to thank you for watching. And don't forget to stay classy, Atarians. California Games was on every platform in the late 1980s. You could get it on the Apple II, Commodore, Atari Lynx, NES, Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, DOS computers, Emerson microwaves, GE toasters, and of course, the Atari 2600. It was the third installment in the Epic's popular games series, with Winter Games and Summer Games preceding it. And while those games were pretty good, I have to admit that back in the day, California Games had a cool factor the others didn't, at least for a young child like me. But can the third installment of the Epic's game series really maintain the momentum of the others? Or was I just a young kid, misled by the cool factor of skateboards and rad neon sunglasses? Let's, totally find out, dudes. Today we're looking at the Atari 2600 version of California Games, and it starts out hot, with some cool flowing colors and Louie Louie playing at the title screen. Even with me being mostly familiar with the Atari 7800 versions of the previous games, I have to say that this looks pretty darn good, even beyond the title screen. For Footbag, better known as Hacky Sack in my neck of the woods, the player character is large and colorful, in a pretty impressive outdoor environment. And unlike earlier 2600 games, this person has clearly defined limbs and facial features, making it quite an impressive feat for the console. I'm curious why they gave him a bald spot, though. It's probably due to some limitation of the console and the graphics, but I like to think that this guy plays so much that he's worn the hair off the top of his head from bouncing the bag off of it. Anyway, if you're playing in the order of the events, then next you're greeted with the half pipe. And once again, it looks pretty decent for the system. Not as impressive as the previous game, but the Hollywood sign in the background is cool. And while your character is much smaller, you can still make out his clothing and body parts. Maintaining this detail on the Atari 2600 had to have been no small accomplishment back in the day. Even in considering that it was a very late release on the console, it still had to have been very impressive upon release. Then we have the BMX event, and this is what you would expect on the 2600. Your character is all black, and the environment and obstacles are lacking the details of the other events. Perhaps it was to allow for the incredible speed that your character can move at, but it's decidedly much less impressive than everything else on the cartridge. And then finally, we have surfing. And while I think this event uses a ton of simple tricks to create the wave and flowing waters, it looks damn good. Whoever programmed this game knew the Atari 2600 in and out, and I can't help but to love the way the surfing event looks. I'd honestly say that Footbag and surfing are incredible looking events. Halfpipe is pretty good, and BMX is just average, but as a total package, including the intro and winter screens, this game is amazing in the graphics department. And heck, even the sound isn't awful. I mean, they did a rendition of Louie Louie for Bushnell's sake. The rest of the audio is nowhere near as robust, but I didn't hate it. Well, okay, after about 30 minutes or so, I started to get annoyed by some of it, like the half-pipe sounds when you're turning your board and crashing. But overall, I once again think they did a fantastic job with the sound. The biggest things for the Epic's games that I played up to this point is that the events have been a mixed bag. In Winter Games for the 7800, I ended up liking most of the events, but Summer Games I really found myself bored more often than not. And these games can look incredible all they want, but if they aren't fun to play, then it's really just a beautiful turd. And we all know the prettiest turd is still a turd. Luckily for us, California Games has some really fun events that can carry the cartridge for some of the weaker ones. Now, if you've had other versions of this game, then you know that there are roughly 6 events or so in total. That is, usually. Some of the versions may vary. But the Atari 2600 version is missing the Frisbee event and the rollerblading event. So with just 4 to choose from, they had to do pretty good in order to justify a purchase. But as I said before, There are some awesome events that I find incredibly addictive in this cartridge. Let's start with my favorite, Footbag, aka Hacky Sack. Your character is mainly tasked with keeping the little ball in the air for as long as possible without it touching the ground. You can use anything but your hands to accomplish this feat, and your character will use his head, feet, knees, his heel, toes, the side of his foot, and even parts of his back to accomplish this. And it's incredibly addictive. Whenever you hit the button, your character usually moves the appropriate body part based on what's closest to the bag at the time. But if you hit it too early, you might try to use a body part long before it's time. Or if you're slightly too late, you might try to bounce it off your head as the bag passes in front of your eyes. Again, it's incredibly addictive, and I found myself working hard to achieve a better and better score as I gathered this footage. Footbag is just superb. My second favorite event is surfing, and initially I didn't care for it. I found myself just watching my little surfer dude float up and over the wave, or down below the bottom of my television. But as I was gathering footage for this review, I started to become addicted. I just had to keep my little dude on the screen for as long as I could. And I started to learn little maneuvers and tricks I could attempt to score a few points, and it was just all incredibly fun to learn. I think it's great that the two more visually appealing events are also some of the best to play, as it means that all the work that went into making these games look as good as they do wasn't wasted. My third favorite event is BMX, but it's a pretty distant third to be honest. Now it's not bad. I actually enjoy it for a few runs at a time, but I feel that it's just way too easy to crash. Almost everything you do results in your little biker ending up on the ground and dizzy. I did get the hang of it, well, sort of, after a few runs. I learned that you have to push forward to gain speed, but to let it go in the air. You could press up when in the air to do flips, but this is not worth it as I could never land. And some of the obstacles just felt impossible to get past. As I said earlier, the graphics are what you would expect from a 2600 game, and I have to say the gameplay is the same way. It feels okay, a middle-of-the-road 2600 game, but my least favorite game, Half Pipe, is one I cannot get any enjoyment out of. I read the manual to try and figure this one out. While it did start to make a little sense at the end, I just couldn't help but to feel that this event is bad. At certain points on the pipe, you can push right or the button to pull off a few different tricks, but it's all just so bland and unexciting. And again, it's easy to lose momentum and fall off your board. Half Pipe is by far the weakest event in my opinion, and I couldn't get it to hold my attention for more than a run or two at a time. The whole time I was in the Half Pipe, I couldn't help but to wish I was doing any of the other events instead. With all that said, let's do the rundown on California games, and see if it's totally radical to the max, or a complete bummer, dudes. First, the pros. As I said, the graphics are incredible for the 2600, and even the sound is pretty awesome. There are incredible graphical effects and elements all over this cartridge. And I'd say that Footbag, surfing, and even BMX are all fun events and worth playing. Chances are you'll find one that you really like. And once you do, I think you'll get totally addicted to one of them like I did with surfing and Footbag. And the controls felt spot on for most of the events. For the cons, I have to say the Half Pipe is a total drag. Definitely the weakest event. Also, some of the graphics and sounds are noticeably weaker than others. Like, by a lot. And finally, there are a few events missing from other versions that I think could have been done much better here than the Half Pipe, which again, is a total drag. Well guys, I'm totally stoked for California games for the Atari 2600. That's why I'm gonna give it 4 CX40 joysticks out of 5, dudes. Yeah, I really like this cart, and I was really impressed with it for most of my time playing it. But it's not just eye candy. It's a strong game on the console, and one that I think a lot of people will find themselves enjoying. It might even become your favorite in the Epix Games series. But now I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below. Have you played California games before? And if so, do you agree with my score? What was your favorite between this, Summer Games, and Winter Games? And have you tried this one on any other consoles? How does this one compare to those? Again, let me know down in the comments below. And now that we got California games in the bag, it's time for me to remind you that I'm the 7800 Pro System Gamer, Surfer Bro here at the Atari Network, and I really appreciate you listening to my review. I hope to catch you in the next one, and until then, stay classy, Atarians.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a classic novel, and a story that warns against man trying to play God. It delves into things that man was never meant to do. A mad doctor becomes obsessed with giving life to a corpse of his creation. made from body parts and organs of several deceased people. He wants to make a brand new life, a new person, and thus make himself akin to God. Whether it's because the wrong brain was used, or that his creation could never have a soul like a man should, the monster is a horrible and violent version of what man is, and thus goes on a killing spree before ultimately being destroyed and killed. Again, it's a classic story, and there are several classic movies based around it, such as the Universal version of Frankenstein, the Hammer horror Frankenstein, or even the hilarity of Young Frankenstein. But today, we're going to explore one of the early video games based on the works of Mary Shelley, and see if Frankenstein's Monster for the Atari 2600 is worth tracking down and playing, or if we should leave it alone on its cold metal table, never to be brought to life again. But first, if you like my videos, please leave a like and subscribe, if you haven't already. Once we reach 5,200 subscribers, I will be doing yet another giveaway, so you don't want to miss out on that, especially if you're a fan of Atari. Okay guys, onward to the review. Frankenstein's Monster was developed for the Atari 2600 and released back in 1983 by Data Age. It's a platforming game that mostly takes place on a single screen, although a secondary scene can be accessed by accomplishing your goals while playing. You play as an unnamed character in Dr. Frankenstein's lab, and your goal is to build a wall around his monster before enough lightning strikes give him the power needed to come alive. If he does get the power he needs, he'll pop to life and start approaching the screen in a somewhat terrifying and menacing manner, at least for the time. It's pretty intense, and I have to say, I enjoy the premise of the game. It's wholly unique from what most people would have done with the concept, and, well, dare I say, it works well. The screen is colorful with nice shades of red, green, orange, and blues, giving diversity to each of the 3 layers of the screen. At the very top, you have Frankenstein's monster himself, collecting the thunderbolts to come to life. While you can't actually reach him or interact with him, well, not at first, you can enter the green platform beneath him when you've collected the brick from the bottom layer of the screen. A ghost will appear from the left and right of the platform, and if he touches you, well, then you'll freeze for a few seconds, wasting precious time. The second layer features spiders walking across the screen, and there'll be anywhere from 2 to 4 holes that will cause you to plummet to the water below. The lowermost layer of the screen features a pool of water in the center, and a log of varying sizes and movement patterns that will allow you to cross. You once again have spiders to contend with, but these ones are white rather than the red from the previous layer, and they will use their webs to fall from the ceiling in groups of either 1, 2, or 3. If the red spiders above touch you, then much like the ghost, you'll freeze in place. But these white spiders will freeze you only for a brief second, but you'll also stop your momentum when jumping, causing you to fall to your death. Also, this layer is where the previously mentioned brick that you're trying to collect lays. Once you grab it, you must now navigate the layers in reverse order to make it back to Frankenstein's monster, and this is where the second screen comes into play. It seems that beneath Frankenstein's monster is a bunch of small and large bats that attempt to keep you from building the wall around Frankenstein. They fly at you pretty fast and in patterns that are tough to decipher and get around. At first they mostly fly straight down, but later they not only get faster and more numerous, but fly at odd angles as well. This causes you to have to run in zigzag patterns, and while the screen isn't as nice looking as the previous, it offers an intense challenge that is a welcome diversion from the rest of the game. You do this multiple times, with the enemies increasing, the logs becoming smaller and disappearing, and with Frankenstein filling in more and more with color. If you drown 3 times, or Frankenstein becomes completely green, it's game over, and the monster will approach you from within the screen to terrorize you. Again, the game looks great, and the sparse sound effects, well, they sound great as well. They really did a less is more thing with the audio, and I really like it. The sounds of the thunder and lightning makes for great atmosphere, and the sound that plays while Frankenstein is approaching you is really good, and adds to the fact that you failed your mission. Frankenstein's monster controls really well, and is a real challenge, more so than you would ever think. I've managed to wall in Frankenstein only a handful of times, as more often than not I end up falling into the water and dying 3 times while attempting to stop him from coming to life. And it's a challenge that I'm up for, and it's great fun for 30 minutes to an hour at a time. But after that, the repetition really sets in, and there isn't much to do or learn once you master the variety of the game. But mastering it will take most people a good while, I would think. And that's really the only issue I have with Frankenstein's Monster. It can become repetitive and isn't recommended for long play sessions. Well, I think it's good for an hour or less. There is a 2-player mode, but you each wait for your turn and alternate to play, which is kind of boring if you ask me. I always consider these 2-player mode styles to be the laziest of all, but that's just me. The screen with the bats moving can be a little annoying too, at least when they start to push you back, all the way to the bottom of the screen. This is, especially annoying when you've almost gotten to the point to lay your brick. But that's the whole point of that particular screen, and it's a challenge that I think most people should be up for. And once you learn the patterns of the bats, you can usually become somewhat adept to managing it. Overall, I think Frankenstein's Monster is a fun and unique platformer for the Atari 2600, and one that has a lot of charm. And as I said, the ending screen actually does a good job of showing that you failed, and the terrifying monster is now rampaging towards you. I think most people should be able to pick up and play Frankenstein's Monster with little to no preparation, and should get a fair amount of enjoyment out of it. But let's take the game into the Atari Network's pros and cons section, and see how much enjoyment there actually is to be had here. For the pros, I have to say that the graphics are nice and colorful, and everything is easy to decipher. The sound, while a little sparse, is ultimately effective, and the game manages the limited resources of the 2600 masterfully. It plays well and presents an excellent challenge that most people should enjoy tackling. The 2 screens couldn't be more different from one another, and that helps to add variety and keep one or the other from becoming too stale for too long. The challenge ramps up nicely while you're playing as well. I also really like the Game Over screen where the monster comes rampaging towards you. But there are cons that we discussed, and firstly, there's the fact that the game is really only suited for short play sessions. There is a 2-player mode, but it's really not much of anything. The bat screen can also get really annoying when the bats continuously push you back towards the bottom. And when it comes to cons, well, that's all I have. So with all that said, I'm going to give Frankenstein's Monster for the Atari 2600 4 CX40 controllers out of 5. It's a charming and fun game, especially around fall and Halloween, and I think most people should really enjoy it. There isn't much to do once you've mastered the game, but there are little things that will help you to beat it quicker and quicker. Like the holes on the second layer, you can jump down them to beat the game quicker by trying to time your landing on the platforms below. Just trying to do this made the game a whole lot more fun and replayable for myself, and it might do the same for you too. But with all that said, well, I think that's all I have to say about Frankenstein's Monster, and now I want to hear from all of you. Have you tried Frankenstein's Monster? If so, do you agree with my score and assessment, or was I way off somewhere? And what other quote-unquote horror games do you like to play on your Atari consoles? Let me know about all this, and whatever else you have to say, in the comments down below. And please consider checking out my social medias if you're so inclined, and join the Discord server to chat with other classy Atarians about, well, Atari. There's links to everything in the description below, along with a link to my Patreon. This channel is supported by Patreons and YouTube members like the ones listed on the screen now. With their help, I'm able to pick up and buy more things to cover for the channel and replace equipment as needed. So, thank you all for your support. You rock, and I couldn't do this without all your help. And with that said, it's time to wrap up this horrifying review here on the channel. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man-made monstrosity built to review Atari games, here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And please remember to stay classy, Atarians. I usually find graphic hacks of other games to be a bit off-putting. It's probably a fantastic way to get started in the realm of homebrew and hobby programming, as you begin to tweak and learn other people's code and graphics. But something about them always felt a little, I don't know, maybe lacking in originality? Like no matter what you do or how you change things, the original will always be in the back of my mind, and I'll always be comparing the tweaks and alterations you've made to that original, for better or for worse. So Haunted Adventure Trilogy is a game cartridge that I wouldn't normally have purchased.
but it was graciously donated by channel Patreon and all-around cool person, Fens the Spook. By the way, Fens has a really cool profile picture. It reminds me of like a Crypt Keeper for some reason, and because of that, I dub Fens the Spook Crypt Keeper of the Atari network. Go forth and lay waste to the Atariverse with tales of horror and puns aplenty. Alright, anyway, let's find out if Haunted Adventure Trilogy has changed my mind on the idea of graphical hacks, or if I feel more justified than ever in my original opinion. Haunted House Trilogy has been available on Atari Age since 2009, and is credited to Anthony Wong. But it seems he had a fair bit of help and inspiration, as the manual has a lengthy thanks and credit section. Speaking of the manual, this thing is a monster. It just might be the largest manual I've ever held for an Atari 2600 homebrew, and for good reason. There's 3 games included on this one cartridge, which is a great value. First you have Haunted Adventure, Boo, which is listed as being a mod of the original Haunted Adventure. I assume the original was a simple mashup of Adventure and Haunted House, which seems appropriate honestly. The 2 games always felt related in some sort of way to me. The second game on the cartridge is the sequel to the first, and it's called Haunted Adventure 2, Redemption. A bit cliche, but it's right to the point. It's yet another Adventure and Haunted House mashup. And finally, you get Haunted Adventure 3, Witch's Flight, which feels very Halloween 3 of the trilogy. Not only does it seem to veer away from the standards set by the first 2, but it also uses the 2600 Superman game as a base, and not Adventure or Haunted House. Hopefully it doesn't go full Season of the Witch on us. So when you insert the cartridge, which does work on the 2600 Plus if you have all the firmware updates, you start on Haunted Adventure 1. Using the Game Select switch, you can cycle through the games. So games 1 through 3 are all Haunted Adventure 1, with Mode 1 being normal, Mode 2 being advanced, and Mode 3 being random. 4 through 6 are more of the same with Haunted Adventure 2, and Mode 7 is the only mode for Haunted Adventure 3. With that out of the way, I'll highlight my experience with each, and then give the whole package a breakdown and a rating at the end. So let's start at the beginning with Haunted Adventure 1, Boo. Haunted Adventure 1, Boo? Did he mean Boo Earns? Well, anyway. In Haunted Adventure 1, you play 23 years after the original Haunted House, and some hooligans have disturbed the final resting place of Old Man Graves. So you have to find the poor man's soul and lay it to rest in his crypt beneath the haunted house from the first game. I got this from the manual, of course, and I really recommend reading it, as I was confused at first. I thought the first item next to you was the sword from Adventure, but if you take the time to do a little research in the manual like I did, you'll realize this is a shovel, and it's meant for finding and revealing the old man's tomb. But first you need to locate his soul, and to do so, you'll have to venture around a maze, and using both the traditional adventure style and controls, along with the limited lighting mechanics of Haunted House. You have the bridge, keys, a hand that acts like the magnet, and a few other items to contend with along your journey. And overall, it's a bit more confusing than Adventure, and I think that's because it's harder to get your bearings, thanks to the relentless enemies. Starting out, you have to contend with the Ghost and the Grim Reaper, and there are ways to manipulate them a little, but honestly, they chase you until you're dead. Luckily, hitting the button respawns you, and you'll be doing a lot of that, at least if you're like me. I found the enemies tough, but especially when I had the soul in my possession. I could not return it to the crypt, even after try, and that's for multiple reasons. First, an even more aggressive ghost joins in chasing you. Second, they damage you like the enemies from Adventure, by trapping you in their jaws and their belly. And third, they like to chase you from below, which is the easiest way for them to get a kill on you, and usually happens when I'm trying to escape the maze with the soul. And it happens over and over again. It happens so much that I just gave up. I never did save the old man on any difficulty. This Adventure and Haunted House hack is cool. I wanted to like it, but the difficulty sucked the fun right out of it. Well, that and the god-awful sound. I know the 2600 doesn't have robust sound abilities to begin with, but the constant sounds of moving and running into things are just ear-grating. But it's okay. Maybe just the first game isn't my speed. There's 2 others to win me over. And next, we're going to be giving Haunted Adventure 2 a chance at redemption. And starting the sequel, I was glad to see that in Mode 4 at least, it resembled Haunted House a little more, at least for variety's sake. This time, the story says that Old Man Graves is calling us back to the house that started it all, and so off we go. Why do we always go? But anyway, this time you're locating the urn that you found in the first game, and it appears to be back together. But the issues from the first haunted adventure are still present, and maybe even worse here. There are more enemies, and they are relentless in tracking you down and killing you. They are just as fast as you are and have a tendency to cut you off and kill you because of it. They also spawn camp me too. The enemies are just ridiculous and suck all the fun right out of the game. I came close to returning the urn a few times, but ultimately, I gave up. It's more of the same, awful sound and frustration from the first game on the cartridge. Except for Game Mode 5. That one isn't more of the same. It's actually quite different, and each game mode for Haunted Adventure 2 is a little different than the others, which is actually really cool. You seem to awake on some sort of riverbed and travel through forests, mazes, and along waterfronts and oceans to find the key back into the haunted house, and then move from adventure to haunted house style gameplay. And the enemies, while still hard as hell, are at least mostly reserved to the house and dark maze areas, so you can explore without a constant threat of death. This mode is so far the saving grace of the cartridge, and I really like the clever way that it pushed both games together. But my frustration was soon back with Game Mode 6, as I was killed over and over by a constant onslaught of bats, eyeballs, and ghosts. No safe zones, no mercies, and no redemption. It seemed to be the same environment from Game Mode 5, but you start in the forest this time. So far, only one of the 6 game modes of this trilogy is really worth playing in my opinion, which is a shame. I didn't go into this game wanting to dislike it. It certainly wasn't my goal. Fens the Spook gifted this to me, and I wanted to give the first donation to the channel all kinds of praise. But I have to be honest in my experience, and so far, it's not a fun one. It was an experience of frustration and unfair difficulty, but we have one game left to go. A game that appears to change things in a very drastic way. So let's see if this trilogy can actually find some redemption. Real quick though, if you decide to take on Haunted Adventure Trilogy, then you absolutely must read and use the manual. You will be absolutely lost in most of the games without it. Not only is the story kind of fun and inventive, but this manual is extremely useful. Even if you consider yourself an adventure all-star, I highly recommend you use this thing. Okay, I just wanted to shoehorn that in somewhere. Anyway, on to Haunted Adventure 3, Witch's Flight, and if you've been following the manual, like I just suggested, then you read at the end of the last game that something swooshed over your head, and it appears to be a witch, who drinks something funky at a bar, and feels like she's flying. I wish I was joking, but no, somebody spiked this woman's drink, and after feeling funny, she turns into a witch. Now she parties with those evil enemies that tortured me during the other 2 games. Each year, she returns for a monster mash with the Haunted House cast, but this time, a Grim Reaper named Karen has summoned 3 Hellspawn and made your friends go crazy. On top of that, he cracked that old magical urn into 3 pieces once again, and if you can't put it together before a certain time, he'll rule all the world. So you start as a human, and you can watch the story progress, which is a cool Easter egg, but outside of that, in the very end of the game, well, there's no real purpose for the human form. Still, flying as a witch is fun anyway, and that's what you want to be doing. You can fly around aimlessly, but it's actually fun to try and save your friends and put the urn together. So I recommend doing that. If you get touched by the winged snake, the swarm, or the cacodemon, then you lose the ability to fly and carry items. You need to locate and kiss your black kitty cat to get these powers back. Depending what position your difficulty switches are in, makes this task easier or harder, which I like. The sound effects are less abrasive too, and I could actually listen to them while I play. They still aren't really good, but definitely much improved. Finding your friends and dumping them off into the graveyard is easy enough, but putting the urn together gives me the most trouble. That thieving bat is back once again, stealing pieces and moving them all around. Plus you have 2 portals, the grave, and the phone booth that all look like they might be where you drop the pieces off at, but it's actually a nondescript door that is the front door to the haunted house. Who would have guessed? Once you get all your friends back and the urn into the case, you have to change back to your human form one last time and return the urn for the ending. I really like Haunted Adventure 3. It gave me a solid challenge the first time through, and I actually had fun trying to beat my time and increase the difficulty for myself. It didn't feel impossible and frustrating like the last two games. It truly was a breath of fresh air on this cartridge. And besides Game 2, Mode 5, I'll be returning almost exclusively for this game in the future. But we need to take this package as a whole into the Atari Network pros and cons section and see if the cartridge can squeak out a recommendation. For the pros, I do think there are some good ideas and game modes on the cart. Mashing Adventure and Haunted House together is actually a good idea, and the Superman hack works better than I would have thought. It was cool seeing the second game be a cohesive world in each of its difficulty settings. Continuing the story and challenge in that way was fun. I do like some of the sprites, and the enemies look pretty frightening when they attack. But we're already onto the cons, and these can be a bit spooky. First off, the difficulty is ridiculous. It sucked all the fun out of most of the game modes. There was also a few too many scenarios where I lost items into the walls and couldn't get them back. The sound is pretty bad throughout and really got on my nerves. Enemies spawn camped me and camped necessary items, making me just shut the game off and go find something else to do, and leaving a game in anger is never a good sign. Also, reading this thick manual is a must, and while I enjoy the manual, I never like games that make you read them. And even though there are 3 games and 7 total modes, well, 5 of them are bad. Only 2 modes was worthwhile to me, and that's a bad average. So with all that said, it's my horrifying duty to give Haunted Adventure Trilogy on the 2600 2 CX40 joysticks out of 5. I see a lot of 5 out of 5 ratings on Atari Age, and I have a feeling that these are people who love adventure and wanted a serious challenge. I think most Atari fans and video game fans in general will find this package too frustrating and difficult to be fun, but I am thankful to have given it a try, and I want to thank Fens the Spook for sending it over to me. It was really nice and appreciated, but unfortunately, it didn't change my views on graphics hacks to this point. Maybe another game out there can. But now I want to hear from all of you. Have you tried Haunted Adventure Trilogy? Do you think it's good? Or if you haven't played it, does it look good to you? Why or why not? And do you agree with my view on graphics hacks? That they are usually less enjoyable than other forms of homebrew? Let me know your take on this and much more in the comments down below. And please, like the video and subscribe if you haven't. We put out 2 videos a week, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload. And thank you to the following classy Atarians who support the Atari Network on Patreon. Without their support, the channel wouldn't have been able to cover this game or many others. So thank you to Jeremiah Thomas, Mr. Shua TV, Fens the Spook, who donated this game, Socrates63, Ball Gobbler, Jolt7800, Head Trauma Bob, OG Hugo, and my own Celestial. You guys rock. And with all that said, it's time I head back to the coffin before the sunrise vanquishes me. I'm a vampire known as the 7800 Pro Gamer here at the crypt called the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for braving Haunted Adventure Trilogy with me. And remember to stay classy, Atarians. I have always known Desert Falcon as an underappreciated Zaxxon-style Atari 7800 launch title. So when I first read that there was a 2600 version out there, well, I was pretty shocked. But I soon forgot all about it and just continued on my Atari journey. That is, until recently, when I walked into a local game store and found a complete-in-box 2600 copy for a mere $9.99. At that price, I figured it was worth checking out. And I was honestly a little bit curious about how well this game could convert from the 7800. So grab your beaks, strap on your wings, and join me as we're heading into the Egyptian Valley of the Kings in search of treasure in the 2600 version of Desert Falcon. Upon booting the game, I have to say that the menu looks comparable to the 7800 version. Obviously not exactly the same, but as close as a 2600 game can get. It's always impressive to see starting menus in 2600 games, as most just enter right into some sort of a track mode until you start the game. Anyway, Desert Falcon gives us the options for 1 or 2 players, and the option to choose our difficulty between Novice, Standard, Advanced, and Expert. Since I don't have any friends, I decided to do 1 player at the Standard difficulty. And after you make your selections, you're greeted with a whole lot of brown. The game does not give a great first impression upon starting, as, well, it looks ugly in my opinion. The title character doesn't look awful, but the background color was a poor choice, and there isn't a whole lot else to look at besides that. Our Desert Falcon does flap his wings convincingly, but so far, that's the only positive I have to say. And it might be one of the only positives, as when you start moving, you see that there is little going on here. You occasionally pass an obelisk, tower, or tiny pyramid, and enemies are far and few in between. And, well, the enemies don't look like much of anything if I'm honest. I was curious how they would be able to pull off the game's iconic, end-of-level Sphinx boss, and it turns out that they didn't pull them off very well. It looks like an outline that they pulled color out of in various spots to give it a little detail, and I think it was an effort to try to mimic the 7800 version, but it looks awful. I wish they would have gone for a different design or a different look rather than doing this. It's just ugly and shameful, but I guess it's on par with the rest of the graphics. So let's make a note about the audio here. I played this game on the 2600 Plus, and no matter what I did, I cannot get the audio to work. I don't know if this is a me issue or not, but there is sound on my 7800 and 2600 Junior. So I will comment about the audio, but be aware that there is none in this video because the 2600 Plus didn't output any. So the audio is pretty much the same as the 7800 version, with a few minor variations. You get the same start of the background music, but it sort of enters this weird little thing regularly that I don't remember from the 7800. The effects of your Falcon shooting and the enemy noises are all fine in my opinion, especially with what the developers had to work with. I think the sound our Falcon makes when he gets hit is a little too loud and jarring, but the rest is mostly fine. Well, except for the Sphinx. While I find the audio to be unique enough, it's just not great to listen to. That is to say, it gets on my nerves fast. All the more reason to quickly deal with the Sphinx and move on, but I wish the sound wasn't so abrasive. Overall, the audio is a ton better than the game's graphics, but it's time to move on to gameplay. After all, good gameplay can make an ugly game worth playing sometimes. But in Desert Falcon's case, well, I wasn't thrilled. I don't know, maybe I'm too jaded from the 7800 version, but I did not think that this one plays well at all. Your main enemy is an off-screen missile that will fly out to hit you. I understand that this version couldn't have all the enemies of the 7800, as that game throws a ton at you at once. But that doesn't mean I have to love what they did with the 2600 version either. Again, Desert Falcon on the 2600 is just lacking in the fun department. And it's going to take a while for most people to get the hang of it too. You push the joystick up to lift your birdie off the ground and take flight. He can change altitude higher or lower by pressing up or down again, and can even walk along the desert floor to pick up hieroglyphs and treasure. And then you push left or right on the stick to avoid a few obstacles that come your way. And some of the enemies feel, well, unavoidable at times, which isn't great. It's almost like they're too big and fast to avoid, especially when you're still getting the hang of the controls. But it's really hard to judge your altitude compared to the enemies in off-screen bullet. I think a lot of people have a hard time with this anyway, which is why these Zaxxon-style games is such an acquired taste. But this one is even worse than usual. The hieroglyphs that I mentioned earlier will give you temporary powers and abilities, but they mostly just hand out points. It seems that there is a lot less variety than what I find in the 7800. But since this version seems to be lacking a lot of enemies, I guess it makes sense. No need to have power-ups that clear the screen of a certain enemy type when they aren't present to begin with. So the game starts out a little too difficult, but occasionally the levels become a cakewalk. Too hard and then way too easy. Not a good difficulty curve if you ask me. And the Sphinx are incredibly difficult as you're right on top of them, and it doesn't work the way I thought it did. Your best bet in this battle is to stay to the lower right until the enemies and shots come out, and then try to hit his face immediately after they pass by you. If you miss, then move back to the lower right and start it all over. After this, you collect treasure and move on to a different colored level. And that's really it for Desert Falcon on the 2600. So the question is, was it time and resources well spent on the Atari in the 80s, or an unnecessary version of a superior 7800 game? Well, let's fly on over to the Atari Network pros and cons section and have a little chat about it. For the pros, most of the sound effects, well, they aren't horrible. I can't say the same for the Sphinx and the music, but whatever. The Desert Falcon himself looks pretty good and has a good flight animation. And I'm actually struggling to come up with more. The menu is pretty cool. I guess it's already time to move over to the cons, and I have a lot. The game itself starts out too hard, and then once you learn its secrets, it becomes way too easy. The Sphinx final boss is awful looking, and really, so are all the other enemies. As I already said, the music and the Sphinx sound isn't good either. And the Zaxxon-style gameplay is already an acquired taste, but this one is especially bad, as it's hard to gauge your enemy's altitude. I also have to mention that I couldn't get any audio to come out on the 2600 Plus. I'm not sure why, but I have to point it out. So with all that said, it's my unfortunate duty to give Desert Falcon on the Atari 2600 2 CX40 joysticks out of 5. The game isn't really broken, but it's just not any fun. It actually gets pretty boring after a while, and it's frustrating at the start. I really wish Atari Corp had put resources elsewhere, rather than having to port this game. It's just a bad 2600 game, and I recommend you play any of the other classics and hidden gems for the console, and try to ignore this one. Even for $10, it wasn't worth it. But now I want to hear from you guys. Have you played the 2600 version of Desert Falcon? Do you agree with what I had to say, or have I gone cuckoo? And do you enjoy the 7800 version if you played that one? Let me know about this, and more in the comments down below. And please, like the video and subscribe if you haven't. It helps the channel out a ton. Also, feel free to continue the discussion on the Atari Network Discord server. Lots of classy Atarians talk our favorite hobby over there, and it's free to join. Link in the description. And we have all new merch with our new and improved logo. That link is also in the description, if you're interested. Don't forget to check out Man vs. 7800 every other Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific. It's like Saturday morning cartoons, except you're watching a middle-aged fat man play Atari games. So join us for the next one. It runs the opposite weeks of the Atari Network podcast. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to thank these classy Atarians who choose to support me and the channel on Patreon. They donate $5 a month to keep the Atari Network growing and going strong. In exchange, get behind-the-scenes updates, posts, exclusive audios, and more. Thank you all so much for the support. It means more than you'll ever know. Alright guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a Desert Falcon in search of the Pharaoh's Fields of Treasure here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching our review of Desert Falcon. And please remember to stay classy, Atarians. There was a time when I didn't run an Atari-based YouTube channel. A time when I didn't collect everything Atari, and simply stuck to my 7800 stuff. And believe it or not, a time when I didn't bother with any homebrew games. It was during this time that I learned about Halo 2600, and I couldn't help but to think that it was so cool. Not only was it one of my favorite first-person shooters, now available on the 2600, not only was it programmed by Ed Fries, who was vice president of Xbox during the OG Xbox era, which happens to be one of my favorite consoles, but it also introduced me to the idea of homebrew being something more than just simple hacks of existing games. Halo 2600 introduced myself, and probably many others, to the idea of new 2600 games in the modern age. But it's been a long time since Halo 2600 was cool and new, so the question that we're going to answer in this review is if Halo 2600 is worth tracking down and playing today, or if it's aged poorly since its initial release. So without further delay, let's get into it. Halo 2600 is a reimagining of the popular Xbox-exclusive FPS game for the Atari 2600, and it was released in 2010 during the Classic Gaming Expo and was then made available on Atari Age. And the whole game is about 4 kilobytes in size. Pretty impressive stuff, but unfortunately, you can no longer obtain a copy from Atari Age, as it was removed during the last chance sale of 2023. But enough talk. Let's have at the game. And before we continue, yes, Halo 2600 is 2600 Plus compatible, at least if you have all the beta firmwares. Anyway, when booting up the game, you're greeted with a nice recreation of the titular Halo in open space. It looks pretty cool for Atari, and the music that briefly plays also feels very much appropriate for Halo. Upon starting the game, you take control of Master Chief, and he really doesn't look bad. He's very recognizable, and it's cool seeing what a 2600 version of him would have looked like in the 80s and 70s. Anyway, starting up has you on a screen with trees, and you must travel up to acquire your pistol. You'll need it, as almost every other screen has the series signature grunts, elites, brutes, and even the massive hunters. Once again, much like Master Chief, it's cool to see all these characters in 2600 form, and it's cool that they're recognizable. Heck, Ed even did a pretty good job in making some of the more iconic environments identifiable. You have the outdoor areas, the inside of the Halo facility, the ice areas, and a treacherous ending corridor. He did a lot with very little, and it helps that I know what I'm looking for. Others might not be so impressed with the graphics, but I think most people will find them pretty decent. And just like the environments, the gameplay is pretty simple too, in theory. You simply move Master Chief with the joystick and fire with the button. It really doesn't get any easier than this. But the enemies keep you on your toes, and the challenge ramps up nicely. The first grunts and elites fire slow shots just like you do. But eventually you'll encounter enemies that shoot faster, and large groups of elites that fire synchronized trios of shots. You'll also have to deal with environmental challenges, such as sliding around icy floors and avoiding bullets from turrets around different rooms. It gets pretty hard, and you need to be ready for a challenge. It really feels like the best parts of games like Adventure and Berserk, but it's still its own thing, and feels appropriate to the Halo franchise. Luckily for you, Master Chief can pick up a nice variety of items. His regenerating shield is gone, but you can pick up shield icons that let you survive one hit instead of immediately dying. You can find these around the world and after killing enemies, and you'll want to snag them. But you'll also need keys to progress, and beyond the initial pistol, you can locate what I believe to be a machine gun. On top of that, you also get a new pair of boots that greatly increases your movement speed and allows you to dodge enemy bullets easier. Everything controls well and feels challenging, but fair. But I was really happy to see what appears to be the Prophet at the end of the game. He fires a shot that breaks apart and can be very hard to deal with initially. And if he takes your last life, you'll need to venture across the Halo just to get another chance. After besting the Prophet, you're greeted with the Halo title screen once again, but this time the background of space is red instead of black. This signifies that you've unlocked Legendary difficulty, and get to do things all over again with reduced movement speed and instant death if you touch any walls. It's a real challenge, and keeps the game going even after beating it once. The whole package is rewarding, and I'm glad I got to experience it. But not everything is perfect. For instance, there's no score at all in the game, but while most people won't mind, I feel that it would have added yet another layer of replayability. It would also give people bragging rights, and a way to play it in a high score challenge and stuff like that. I also encountered a few glitches, and I'm not sure if these are common or not. One time I got stuck on an elite and couldn't free myself. I also seemed to be invincible while I was stuck on him. It was strange, but funny for a few seconds. I also had one enemy disappear on me, but was still able to shoot and take away my shield. Once again, it was strange and only happened the one time. Beyond that, my only other complaint is the audio. As I said, the brief Halo theme was awesome, but that's really all you get. Everything else is so sparse, and it was probably to save space on the cartridge, but I would have liked a little more audio. But maybe I'm being a little too unrealistic here, as he wasn't working with much space. But with all that, there really isn't much else to say about Halo 2600, so I think it's time we take the game into the Covenant ship, known as the pros and cons section, to see if Halo 2600 is recommended or not. And as always, we'll start with the pros. The game is done incredibly well and feels very much like a part of the Halo series. Master Chief and the enemy sprites look great and can be easily identifiable by hardcore fans. Even the environments, although sparse, are clearly from the original games. The game plays well and presents a fair challenge. The inclusion of a legendary difficulty after completing the game was a fantastic idea and a great way to extend the experience. I was also glad to see a nice variety of items and power-ups. Halo 2600 is fan service, but the best kind of fan service. But it's not perfect, and I want to air out my complaints. First, the sound starts out awesome, but then becomes completely sparse. There is no score of any type, and I feel that this could have extended the replayability of the game. It seems odd that a 2600 game wouldn't have some sort of scoring feature. And finally, the game had a few glitches that came out of nowhere. I got stuck on an elite and had to reset once, and I had an enemy in particular disappear when he shouldn't have. But with all that said, myself and the other prophets agree that Halo 2600 has earned 4 CX40 joysticks out of 5. The game plays great and has a timeless feel, not so different from games like Berserk and Adventure. My complaints are really minor ones at the end of the day, and I hope everybody who was interested in a cartridge grabbed one when they could. There is one person who is putting out reproductions on the internet, but he seems to do it at random. Otherwise, you can download the ROM for free with a simple Google search. But enough of what I think, it's time to hear from all of you. Have you tried Halo 2600? What do you think of it? Do you agree with the score? Or have I taken a few too many plasma shots to the head? Let me know the answers to all this and more in the comments down below. And please, continue discussing the game and anything else Atari related in our Discord server. It's free to join, and we have a link in the description down below. I hope to see you there. And please, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. We put out 2 videos a week, so hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I upload. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the following classy Atarians for supporting me on Patreon and YouTube memberships. You can too, and you'll get extra content and shoutouts at the end of every video by clicking the join button or going to patreon.com/7800progamer. So thank you to HugeAss79, Jeremiah Thomas, Mr. Shua TV, Ben's the Spook, Socrates63, Ball Gobbler, Jolt7800, OG Hugo, Head Trauma Bob, and my own Celestial. You guys rock. And with all that, it's time we wrap up another review. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a Covenant brute with one of the bladed grenade launcher things here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching. And remember to stay classy, Atarians.